Welcome back to Working Mad.
Welcome back.
Ben Bruce, Jesse Olathe. Pleased to be at your service, philosophically speaking. This is the fourth segment of this episode where we're covering lots of topics.
Lots of topics.
And in a sense, what I wanted to do was to bring it together to some degree in this episode. And also, whilst we don't need to be optimistic and end on a positive note, because that's just downright insulting, really. It's a platitude.
It's as extreme as ending on a bad note.
Sometimes things are just aren't what they are.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, there's neither good nor bad. Again, it's an extreme. Your false dichotomy. It just is what it is, and I think forewarned is forearmed, and we can respond as best we can accordingly. I wanted to bring up spiral dynamics, which is a model of consciousness development, and thus, in a pluralistic sense, collective social development or cultural development as well. Sectors in your society are at different levels of consensus consciousness. So, but at the end of the day, it's the development of consciousness in a model called spiral dynamics, proposed by Beck and Graves. And Ken Wilber wrote a lot about this as well in his Integral Psychology. You have colour memes, and we'll present a graphic on this, whereby you have an ascension of consciousness development, starting off with, I think it's red or brown, and then purple, and then red, and it goes up. Yeah. But basically what you're seeing, I don't have the graphic there as I thought I did, of course. You have a development of consciousness and values and what's important to you, and the first 6 levels or so are called first tier consciousness, and it's the movement of object relations and what's important to you and cultural values and personal values, and you're going up from primitive tribalism in a sense, magic and animism, the sense of spirits being in the land and the forest and the trees, moving up toward more of a power-based society or red meme. Whereby you have clans and clan warfare, the Genghis Khan and those sorts of things, all the way up to any kind of dictator, overlord, all the battles and so on to get land and possessions and resources. That's sort of what's important to people at that level of consciousness. Moving up to blue meme, which is all about structure. It's all about order and law, and oftentimes you have the monarchy, you have the aristocracy, you have the courts. You've got modernism in there too somewhere. You've got structure and traditional systems, conservative values of family and nation state, and all the bourgeoisie are happy, and they're in between this. You've got the aristocracy, they're happy, and they utilise the proletariat. Blooming structure, and then you have a movement toward green meme at some point in time, where you actually start to have an appreciation for pluralism, relativism. People have different sorts of arguments and points based on their socio-cultural background, and it's also green environmentalism and context-based reasoning. But what starts to happen in the green meme, which is sort of 20-30% of the world, if not more now, this is the whole LGBTQI, everyone's different, we all have human rights, but different strokes for different folks at the same time, is you start to lose your threads, you start to lose your structural integrity and even your connection to the land and through things like shamanic practices and all that.
Because you start being accepting of everything.
And no one's accountable.
Like
a terrorist who blows up a school, you're constantly coming up with excuses about his background and how he's been forced into it by ISIS or by the
bad parents,
the US allies bombing them. Or bad parents.
Or what was him. And they have an argument.
Or that's their socio-cultural heritage in Islam.
But it's a good argument, but it is extreme.
And what it does is it actually sidesteps and evades personal responsibility. And the fact that we're all responsible for what we do ourselves, and we make choices, which is good old-fashioned parenting 101 and discipline 101. So you will have factors which have led to you being at this point in time. And that doesn't mean that you can get away with murder, and so on and so forth. So what we want is an appreciation of all the memes of the spiral all the way up from brown, red,
Yeah.
purple, red, blue, green. You want to have an appreciation of all of that. You want to have standards of things like respect and manners and do unto others, and also the whole pluralism and contextual relativism of your socio-cultural background. You move across that into second-tier consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
This is complex. I'm probably not doing it justice, but it is a difficult topic. And you then move through consciousness development into second-tier consciousness, and you move into what we call the yellow mean, which is only a small percentage of people, I think, at this stage. But it's based on holistic, systemic awareness. So the system, the way things interrelate, and it's a holistic sort of multifactorial appreciation.
Understanding the parts and understanding, respecting
Your
all the
relationship
parts
with the parts,
and that make up the whole.
And then you move from yellow to turquoise, and then arguably coral, which is the top-notch second-tier consciousness. And turquoise is defined by an integrative, holarchical paradigm awareness, whereby every level of development in the spiral is important, and when one grows or a culture grows, you transcend and include the preceding levels of developmental consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all valid and are all required in order to hold up the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can have discretion and duty of care, mm-hmm. and independence and civil liberties and freedom to speech
and appreciation
of the whole and the system as well.
It's a bit like having a king who
Integrative holarchical.
A king who either or does not respect the subjects below. And if they do respect it, then they are a formidable unit. But
the only reason the king is there is because the people who are beneath him, so to speak.
Exactly.
Otherwise, how would you define kingness?
Exactly.
So it's hierarchical, but it's holarchical, where it appreciates all the parts that make up the whole.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, you can actually talk about non-extreme, polarized arguments and discourses. So we can talk about ISIS, and we can talk about the US foreign policy and the coalition
mm-hmm.
forces, if you will, of the Western countries, and CIA infiltration,
mm-hmm.
And covert black ops, and we can talk about personal responsibility of the terrorists who dropped the bombs or committed whatever carnage they have. So it doesn't let anyone off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
It's all relevant, and that is how we overcome false dichotomy. We have to appreciate the integrative, holarchical, holistic, systemic context of whole and part at the same time.
And ideally, in the turquoise, it'll be not one nation's responsibility, but the world as a whole working together to come up with ideas and support each other to come up with the best methods or practices for overcoming those problems.
Yeah. And so it's a helpful way to look at these differences that we see of false dichotomy and polarity, where people will try to hook you into branding you with an ism or a phobia these days, or a political incorrectness, try to put you into a camp to label you as something, to dismiss the quality of your argument and the richness of your argument if you have a voice to speak out.
And box you, to shut you out,
and make assumptions stereotypically accordingly.
Yeah.
If we move to second tier consciousness in our own paradigm, we don't do that. And we can see when people are doing that. We're outside of that brandishing of swords, parrying and so on.
And you can see how fruitful that is. I mean, what a wonderful way to be. And I think what's important about this model is that it shows us how far we've come, where we've come from, where we are now, and where we're going to get to. And it's a bit like if you were to work on a project. You could do it without knowing what's up ahead. But if you have a plan, a blueprint that you could follow, things make a lot more sense. Things are more efficient, less scary, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And this is mindfulness as well, really. It's very much a yellow turquoise worldview in action. where you are able to do something and then be aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it, and get out of your mind and be into what you're doing. That's mindfulness, really. That awareness, that conscientious awareness of what you're doing. It's a healthy way to be. It's a healthy application. It's something which is useful. And goodness me, we need things that are useful.
We do, because this is an important time. This is a very important time. The world is sick. I'm seeing.
I mean, you could also say that it's simply reaching a crescendo, and it's a cyclical pattern that comes and goes. You know, it's that battle between good versus evil and everything in between. That movement from, you know, fascism and elite powers above to democracy and independence and civil liberties and freedoms. And everything is getting twisted and topsy-turvy in terms of, you know, like capitalism, you know, which means that the market dictates price and I'm free to buy and sell accordingly, so everyone can have a job and trade and exchange value for value and thus be independent. You know, if you want something, you got to buy it, you got to pay for it. How do you pay for it? You have to work, or you have to trade, and so on and so forth. That's capitalism. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with it at all. If you want something from me, if you want this book, you know, it's going to cost you $20, for example. That's it. Do you want it? If you don't want it, great. It doesn't matter. And it's trade. And then you go, I'll give you 15. Okay, 16. Or I've got a deal. When you mess that up with excessive taxations and, you know, tariffs and duties, and, you know, people are given free money because of this minority status, and it's not gifted or charitable, but it's actually forcibly taken from the people through taxation and, you know, basically through extortion. The taxation office is really extortionate in that regard, because you don't freely give your money away. Income tax was levied to pay for the wars of the 20th century. Before that, no one would dream of taxing your income because it's your money. And now we've just forgotten that. You know, we just pay it because that's what you do.
Because it's blitzkrieg.
It's habit. And that money is used against you often. You know, like the wars that are perpetually going on.
And now we're seeing these powers, like corporations, building shopping centres that have more money in them, well, the development of them, than our schools and education, our public services. I mean, are we seriously prioritising material consumerism shopping centres over our education?
Well, the fact of the matter is, with education, a lot of people don't want to pay for it because they look upon it as a social public service, as you said, which comes from the extortion of tax. Well, that's a libertarian argument. But basically, I was just on that point of capitalism has been brandished or misappropriated to be a bad thing. No, that's corporatism, okay? Where corporations can dominate markets through underhanded tactics and even put governments in power through lobbying to give them favours and extinguish all competition and all the little guys and all the little players, you know, on the market. The small and medium businesses really can't compete with these multinational companies who are laws unto themselves and can get away with murder really. And that's corporatism. That's corporate fascism. That's not the same as capitalism. Okay, capitalism is trading with the market dictating price and based on fair value for value exchange. There's nothing wrong with it. You know, people confuse that with corporatism. That's one example of how names and labels and misappropriation of these labels and basically pulling a fast one on you by language. Things like political correctness as well.
The systems as well. Look at our politicians. Did you know that lobbying, you can lobby to politicians, give them money to support an idea. You say, okay, I'll give you this X amount of money because I want you to do this. And we come to an agreement.
It needs to be illegal.
Yeah.
It has to be illegal.
Yeah, it has to be legal. Yeah.
Because you see, lobbying, that's a misappropriated term. It's bribery.
Yep.
That's what it is.
Yes.
So, but, you know, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, as Shakespeare said. Yes. And it's bloody true. It's just bribery.
And I really love this idea where they would have to, the politicians would have to wear the logos of the people who are lobbying them. And can you imagine?
Like an athlete.
Like an athlete or a Formula One driver.
Yeah.
Because these politicians,
honesty in politics.
These politicians would come out with more logos on them than those Formula One drivers in there. They'd be covered in them.
They'd have to wear 2 suits to fit on.
And so you have to think these corporations have all this money.
Which they don't have.
They have all this money because they've abused capitalism. They've got monopolies, and they're able to lobby where the normal people can't.
And don't get me wrong, some politicians are wonderful.
Yes, absolutely. We're not being extreme here.
There's different sorts of politicians. We're not anti-government. We're just about honest government. And some politicians are great. And at the end of the day, you could be saying, well, if you're so good at this, you should go and do it. You should go into politics and so on. But there's an argument that free press, which we're achieving at Waking Matt, in some sort of a blog, vlog, even if it might be a bit polemical at times, is a critique. A constructive critique, hopefully, an observation, a reporting, a philosophical discourse about what's going on is also just as important as running the government. Especially once you get into the system, you kind of get corrupted by it.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of the time.
Absolutely, we're investing in this in our time. When we go home at night time, we invest our hours into this. We come here, we record it, we invest in cameras, in doing the editing and attend conferences,
reading books.
Like to say that we're not doing anything. That's a bit disrespectful.
There's many ways to skin a cat.
There are,
and I have deep respect for for all kinds of jobs. I mean, gardening, sweeping the terrace. Someone's got to do that.
Someone's got to do it,
and it's a valid occupation.
This is that turquoise understanding.
Cleaning and any trade, as well as things like politics and media and polemics and journalism and so on. And everyone has a legitimate and valid contribution, which is worthy of our respect. Yeah. Which again should be appreciated. And it's a second-tier consciousness.
It's appreciation of all the things, all the parts that work together that make the whole.
Well, I think that's pretty much all I needed to say.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say, Jess?
No.
So we're going to wrap this up.
Yeah.
We haven't talked too much about David Icke's archons and all that, but that's not necessarily the view I espouse anyway. I was just going to say that David Icke's view of this universe in terms of the ontology, how this came about, was the demiurge, some kind of false god, if you will, came to this dimension or created this dimension, and archons are like some demonic/alien being, has this for conspiracy theory, and they basically don't have innovative, resourceful consciousness themselves, but biological entities that are born here naturally incarnate with divine consciousness channeled through us, the transceiver of the brain and the soul, the mind, so to speak, the heart, really. And they have basically fused with us parasitically, symbiotically, to live through us and experience the world through us. So we share elements of their mind, and that's why we're in essential conflict as human beings, and often have inner conflict and a turmoil going on, because we have their mind, the archon mind, and we have our divine spark, our Gutterfunken, as Schiller and Beethoven put it, the divine beautiful spark. We're in our animal instincts and our higher human instincts and so on. It's a very difficult thing to be a human being. So the model is that we're basically being entrapped here, and the perception, deception, and so on. And the idea is that making human beings into cyborgs, basically to entrap our attention, to reduce all freedoms in a one-world government, so that we can be exploited ever more so for our divine consciousness, which they need to live through, whilst we have no freedom at the same time. Don't quite understand it myself. You probably can tell from my bumbling words. Can't quite get my head around it, but it's a very interesting point for departure to understand some of the conflicts that Freud would have talked about, for example, and repression and conflict and so on and so forth. Like I said, where you start doesn't necessarily mean where you end up. It's a point of departure. It doesn't need to be true in order for it to be useful. It could be a model, it could be an idea. How do we attain ultimate truth anyway? But it's an interesting point of departure to think about consciousness dynamics.
If I was to entertain the idea, I would look at how patterns repeat themselves. And consciousness, when you think about it, my mind and my being, I'm putting out something. I have to output something. Everything has an input and an output. This is the Ouroboros, the consumption, the snake eating its own tail. It has to, in order to have that constant input-output. This is the duality working together to create a complete holistic environment, right? When you have this resource, this mind, which when we create a thought, we think that, it's just inside of us. But I don't think so. I think that when we channel consciousness, that is a resource. And just because it's not a resource that we care about, doesn't mean that it's not a resource that something else cares about, such as these archons, right? And humans,
when you
think
value
about
something when it's scarce or you don't have it.
Yeah, exactly.
And we take it for granted.
We do.
And think it's normal. But
Yeah.
imagine if you didn't have that divine spark, that connection to the unitary consciousness being indivisible, which we experience through enlightened states,
and
states of consciousness and things like samadhi states in yoga. We can experience that sense of interconnectedness, which a lot of people talk about with these sort of high-level spiritual consciousness experiences. Imagine if you didn't have that.
And imagine
if you were segregated and in the dark.
And how lovely would it? It'll be the same as us loving to eat food. Some of you have gorgeous food, gorgeous meals. Who's to say that our consciousness, when we channel, has different flavors about it? That when consumed, Ouroboros, again, the pattern repeating itself, that it creates love and fear and all this sorts of.
So archons really are really the old-fashioned demons of old, demonology. The demons of the Catholic Church, the demons of Pentecostals, the demons of Islamic culture, the demons of the Buddhist culture. I mean, there's a cross-cultural validity there. The Gnostics called them archons, and the idea is that this is a false god that's created this world, entrapping divine consciousness from a different dimension, and we're all here under duress, really, and forget who we are. We forget that we're God, really, in a segregated, disconnected form. And I think we're going to probably invite Robert Bruce back on the show and talk to him about his demonology paradigm. He wrote a book called Practical Psychic Self-Defense, which I actually assisted in editing years and years back. And so he's got a very interesting paradigm. Do we believe it? Hell no. We're just open-minded. And it would be good to actually speak to him about his paradigm, because it's a very interesting paradigm. It's a bit scary, a bit paranoid in parts, but he's got his theories and his arguments and his evidence to back that up. And I'm open-minded, that's for sure. And I've experienced bizarre paranormal phenomena myself in the past, so who knows. But look, I'm concerned that SD chip is going to be full. It probably is already. But thank you so much for tuning into Waking Mad.
Thank you very much.
The Consciousness Project. And like I said, the Consciousness Project is affecting the consciousness of the people doing the project, because it's a feedback loop system. And I can feel the consciousness of the people watching this right now, even though they haven't watched it yet. Time is obviously an illusion, right? And I can feel all kinds of lovely
future
critical comments, which is fine. I try not to read them too much, but yeah, it's quite interesting that consciousness is required to do the Consciousness Project and being affected by it. Wonderful stuff.
Wonderful stuff.
Thanks very much, Jesse.
Thank you.
Pleasure doing business with you, sir.
Pleasure.
And we'll see you again from Ben and Jesse at the Waking Mad Consciousness Project in the future.
Thanks, guys.
Be true.
Be true.